Welcome to the 24-25 General Operating Support Application Workshop. Let's see here. So to begin today, we acknowledge that the land we stand on and the place that we call Cuyahoga County is land that was claimed by the United States government through force, displacement, and treaties negotiated in bad faith. We acknowledge those of the Shawnee, Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Haudenosaunee Confederacy, whose lands we stand on, and the thousands of Native Americans representing over 100 tribes who currently live in Northeast Ohio today. And we thank the Lake Erie Native American Council for helping us develop this acknowledgement. We also want to take a moment to lift up CAC's value of equity. We lead with racial equity in our work because the creation and perpetuation of racial inequities, inequalities, is embedded into government and grant making. We confront the white supremacy that resides in our work because racial inequities across all indicators of success are deep and pervasive. We also recognize the power and potential that organizations who produce arts and culture programming have as bearers of culture. These institutions have the power to write the narrative about who belongs and who is valued. We encourage arts organizations to connect with resources to advance equity in your own work. And you can visit cacgrants.org/equity or contact our team to learn more. So I'd like to briefly introduce our grant making team. We have Jake Sinatra, our Director of Grant Making, and Laura Mattio, who's our Grant Making Associate. And then we have 3 grants managers, myself, Maya Curtis, and Davon Nichols, who Davon will help me present today. All of our grantees and applicants have a grants manager assigned to them. So who is your primary contact at CAC? And I believe that most of our general operating support applicants this year belong to Maya. So if you don't know who your grants manager is, shoot us a message and we can let you know. And so I will pass it to Davon to get us started with the agenda. You're muted.
Thank you for that. At this time, CAC has completed the eligibility check phase for our 2024 grant cycle, and organizations at this workshop have been determined to be eligible to apply for the General Operating Support Grant. This next phase of our process of application, which is what we'll dig into today, the content we're discussing today comes directly from CAC's General Operating Support Guidelines. This 12-page document is the roadmap for the grant cycle that CAC's board has approved. The staff agrees to follow and is shared publicly with applicants and panelists. I encourage you to have a close read and make sure that you're getting ready to work on your application. Laura will share in our chat the link to our grant guidelines download PDF. And we'll briefly touch on the goals and the differences between GOS and project support. We'll discuss the funding criteria for the 2024 grant cycle. We'll look at the application and how it differs from project support, one you might be familiar with. We'll explain how the panel review process will take place. That's the next step after the application. And finally, we'll hold plenty of our time for questions at the end. Since there's just one person here today, feel free to ask any questions that you have, and we'll be sure to make sure we have the time to assist you with everything. So the purpose of the General Operating Support Grant is to strengthen the community by deepening its access to arts and culture through meaningful, multi-year core support to arts and cultural organizations based in serving Cuyahoga County. The GOS grant is a 2-year grant with grant amounts determined by revenue-based formulas and approved by the CAC board each year. It is flexible funding, so this means that you can use it to fund your project or your public arts, your cultural programming broadly, or for organizational costs. The big difference is that applications for general operating support are not for the project support. And project support is that your organization is going through the application process rather than a specific project. So looking at CAC's funding criteria, the criteria are for the public benefit, artistic and cultural vibrancy, organizational capacity. The funding criteria are important to consider when working on your application because they are the rubric that your application is scored against. The panelists that we have will assess all parts of your application through the lens of the funding criteria. They will ensure that all applications are judged by the same standards. If your organization shows sufficient evidence of meeting CAC's funding criteria, you will be recommended for funding. Again, unlike the project support, panelists are digging into whether your organization's mission and work meet the goals of the General Operating Support Grant. Not just a specific project that meets our goals. This is a more rigorous process than the project support application. Applications are scored using a 100-point scale, and 45 of those points are assigned to public benefit. A minimum of 75 points are required for an organization to be funded.
So as you are working on the application, take the time to read through the full definitions of the funding criteria in the guidelines. There's a really clear link between our funding criteria and our application to allow applicants to show how they're meeting the criteria. So we'll spend a few minutes right now to cover each of the funding criteria and talk about where and how you might address each of them in your application. Public benefit is our first funding criterion. It's an organization's ability to meaningfully and authentically connect with its community to achieve its mission. This is the criteria that carries the most weight in the scoring. So some examples of how an organization can demonstrate public benefit include, but are not limited to, understanding, respecting, and sharing power with its community, listening and responding to its community, building and strengthening relationships, being inclusive and engaging diverse populations, and being accessible and inviting to its community and the broader public. So this grant is for organizations with a primary mission to produce public arts and culture programming, again, for the public. And as we're talking about publicly accessible programming and who is engaged with your work and how, I want to talk a little bit more about how we define community. So a community can be defined by geography, identity, or affinity. And the best way to demonstrate public benefit is to show that you share power with your community by understanding, respecting, working with, and responding to them. Every organization will be serving a different community, and your community is very unlikely to be all of Cuyahoga County. A strong applicant is one that centers its community and is welcoming and inclusive of the wider public. A strong application will show that connection to your community threading throughout the entire organization, not just a singular outreach project or a department. We give applicants the space to tell the panelists exactly who your people are and how to show that you know, respect, and work with them through the questions listed here. A great example of an organization, I'll give an example of a current grantee that kind of meets each of these three criteria. A great example of public benefit is the Great Lakes Science Center. Their 2022 goal was to maintain a strong presence as a destination at the North Coast Harbor, while also working to be a welcomed and established presence in the wider community through partnerships. They did this by designing and installing the state-of-the-art playground and exhibits with their partner organization Magnet, and being a part of the community open house with science shows and hands-on activities there. So I'll hand it to Davon to talk about the next criteria. You're still muted.
Apologies for that. So the next funding criteria is artistic and cultural vibrancy. It's our organization's ability to create relevant and engaging work that furthers its mission. It's not the same as artistic excellence or artistic quality. We intentionally don't use those terms as they are very subjective. Examples of how an organization can demonstrate artistic and cultural vibrancy include, but are not limited to, incorporating a process of reflection to ensure that programming is relevant or created with its community. Building the capacity of arts and cultural professionals, helping them to thrive. Engaging a diverse team of arts and cultural professionals qualified to achieve the mission. And identifying opportunities to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging through its work. We include specific questions around this criteria for applicants to address the artistic and cultural vibrancy of their programming. To describe the artistic team, programmatic highlights, and how you reflect and integrate your work. A great example of an organization with a strong connection to artistic and cultural vibrancy is the Cleveland International Film Festival. They set a goal to collaborate with a diverse and talented team of artistic programmers to assemble their Cleveland International Film Festival 46 lineup. In 2022, they engaged the most diverse programming team in their organization's history, which looks for ways to elevate films produced by women, BIPOC, Latina, and LGBTQ individuals, and films that reflect current and historical events that shape the way we interact with others in our community. And for the third funding criteria, it's organizational capacity. It's an organization's ability to successfully plan for and manage its resources. It's important to ensure that we're being good stewards of the public dollars and that the organizations we grant to can receive and carefully manage those dollars. Examples of an organization that can demonstrate organizational capacity include, but again, are not limited to, setting goals, measuring progress and evolving, recruiting and retaining a diverse staff and board that can carry out the mission, planning strategically to achieve and maintain a strong financial position, and evaluating organizational processes and structures to ensure a culture of belonging where everyone can thrive. A good example of a strong organizational capacity is in the roots of American music. In 2022, they extended leadership transition from their founder, retiring, to an executive director who overlaps significantly with the founding director and a new artistic director. They also have a goal going forward to continue to recruit and retain a diverse and qualified group of teaching artists and board members who can advance the organization's mission.
So we've used the word belonging several times when talking about all three funding criteria. And so I want to clarify what we mean by that. We define this and several other important terms in our glossary, which is linked in the guidelines, and we can share it now as well. So it includes words like diverse, sharing power, community, and others. So belonging is about an unwavering commitment to not simply tolerating and respecting difference, but to ensure that all people are welcome and feel that they belong in a given space. This graphic here, which comes from John A. Powell and the Othering and Belonging Institute, is a great example of that. Belonging is not just about inviting people into the circle, but expanding it, bringing in more chairs, for example. It's about bridging between differences, not saming or requiring people to change or integrate. It's about co-creating and co-owning. In organizations and institutions, this concept should be present at all levels, not just in an education or outreach department, but especially in leadership where power is held. Belonging in practice will look different at every organization, but it will not include token people of color. It won't include extractive partnerships with smaller organizations or outreach programs into communities where you have no trusting relationships built. Applications that don't demonstrate understanding and respect for their community will not be recommended for funding. And organizations that cultivate belonging throughout their work will be able to demonstrate strong connection to our funding criteria. So now we'll talk about the the application content. So we aren't going to go through each question, but we will go over each section here. You can see a full list of the instructions for the application in a PDF that, again, is linked in our guidelines, and we can drop a link in the chat as well. The actual application lives in our online application and reporting system where you completed your eligibility check, which is cacgrants.smapply.org. The first section is the organizational overview, which includes your mission statement, organizational history, and a summary of your current and previous fiscal year budgets. The next section is the funding criteria narratives. This is what we just talked about and the questions that connect to each criteria. The panelists will be looking for evidence here and throughout every part of your application that you have a strong demonstration of the funding criteria. The institutional goals section is where you will share your work plan for the first grant year, 2024. You'll submit a goal for each of CAC's funding criteria, as well as a racial equity goal. That is, what actions will you take during the grant period to work towards racial equity in your work and organization? The funding criteria goals are seen by panelists and reviewed as part of your application, but the racial equity goal is not. If funded, these goals are what you'll report back to CAC on during the grant year. So arts and cultural support materials, these show evidence of your narrative and help bring your organization's work to life for the panelists. They can be images, videos, links to online pages, survey results, letters of support, or anything else that can help a panelist understand your organization's work. Panelists will review up to 5 support materials. So don't overload them with too much information. For example, a whole script or something like that. But do bring your organization to life by creating a photo collage, maybe rather than submitting one single photo as a support material. Give context and explanation for your materials and consider how you can demonstrate the 3 criteria, especially public benefit, in your chosen support materials. If you have a current strategic plan, this is a great example of something that would be a great support material. So the last section here is organizational or financial support materials. You will share your board of directors list, including their professional affiliations. You'll share your current fiscal year's organizational budget. You'll share your fiscal year 2022 audit or review. And you'll also share the SMU Data Arts Funders Report with the last 3 fiscal years of data completed. The CAC Funders Report is generated from your cultural data profile, which is a free and secure online survey of financial and programmatic information about your organization. The system, which is led by Southern Methodist University Data Arts Program, puts that information into a standardized report, making it easy for panelists to see extensive data about your organization in a clear and consistent format. It takes some time to complete, but is an incredibly valuable tool, both for soliciting funding and for organizations to understand their own finances over time. We recommend getting started on that early, since there might be some back and forth or further information gathering once you've gotten started. SMU Data Arts has a ton of support to help applicants complete this survey for the first time or on an ongoing basis. And we have an instructions document we'll share here that has information on how to access those resources. The last thing I'll say with this slide is, again, remember that panelists are looking for evidence of the 3 funding criteria throughout your application. Devon, you want to take this slide?
Yes, I can. So applications are due Thursday, August 3rd at 4:30 p.m. Late and incomplete applications will not be accepted and will not go forward to the panel for review. We invite a panel of experts from outside the region to review applications, then to come together in a live Zoom meeting to discuss and determine final scores based on funding criteria and scoring rubric in the guidelines. Recommended organizations will complete the earned revenue and support form, which is form we use to determine grant sizes. Panel scores and recommendations are then approved at the regular meeting of our Board of Trustees in November. Then the first grant year runs through the calendar year. We have specific requirements for our grantees, the mid-year and year-end reports, which are explained in the guidelines as well. Grant agreements are issued each year.
So here's our subtle reminder. So With that, we thank you for joining us today, and we will stop the screen share and see if there's any questions.